All right. So next week it is rock and river or something like that. And I haven't decided what we should do for the assignment. What should we do for the assignment? Well, it is this is on the Black Panthers.
Okay.
I kind of like the.
So I guess I could do it to where I don't know how much material, I don't know how much scholarship is available regarding Black Panthers. Why don't we check?
Did anybody do the Black Panthers for the A&M-Commerce assignment?
I doubt it. There's some pretty interesting movies and stuff, documentaries. I do know that. I've watched a couple. It's kind of hard to read too, like this one was. People not doing so well. For 13-year-old Sam, it's not easy being the son of a known civil rights activist, Roland Childs, especially when his older and best friend, Stick, begins to drift away from him for no apparent reason, and then it happens. Sam finds something that changes everything forever. Sam has always had faith in his father, but when he finds literature about the Black Panthers under Stick's bed, he's not sure who to believe, his father or his best friend. Suddenly, nothing feels certain anymore. Sam wants to believe that his father is right. You can affect change without using violence. But as time goes on, Sam grows weary of standing by and watching as his friends and family suffer at the hands of racism in their own community. Sam begins to explore the Panthers with Stick, but soon he's involved in something far more serious and more dangerous than he could have ever predicted. Sam is faced with a difficult decision. Will he follow his father or his brother, or his mind or his heart, the rock or the river?
Anybody have any ideas?
Yeah, we could do what we did last week.
Find
something
reverse.
topically related.
Okay. We can do that.
Productive.
So that's what the assignment is going to be. I'm sorry?
I like the productive questions. It makes me think.
We could find the article and write productive questions. Like instead of saying why we picked it, we could write productive questions.
Okay.
And I don't think anybody's going to find anything on rock and rivers. So, all right, so here we go. Or film. I'm going to add that. Sound all right?
Okay. So you just want one productive question?
Yep. Okay.
Either from the novel or the article.
Using the article and the novel, identify a productive question.
Black Panthers. Black Panther. Black Panther Party. Black Panther movement.
The Black Panthers were absolutely unique.
Being black in America meant that you didn't walk down the street with the same sense of safety and the sense of privilege as a white person. Attack dogs, fire hoses.
Police jump on you, beat you up, put the gun at your head. This is what we were going through on a daily basis.
We stand on the eve of a black revolution, brother.
Now we have voices within the community that we're not going to continue to turn the other cheek.
Second Amendment guarantees.
I have watched that one. The Murder of Fred Hampton, Huey P. Newton story, Night Catches Us, the Black Power mixtape, Black Panthers Vanguard of the Revolution. That's the one I showed you. So if you're interested in pursuing Black Panthers, because One Crazy Summer is also about Black Panthers, but a very different spin on it. And I will say that the Black Panthers, there were always issues regarding men and women, because the women were expected to stay, they were expected to do everything, including take care of the children, fight the good fight, and but not really get to fight the good fight. So they were kind of repressed, greatly repressed, actually. So and that comes up in One Crazy Summer, I think you'll find. And the men were pretty controlling over the women in this instance. But those are really interesting documentaries. If you want to watch those, and that gives you some history and some background to help you understand what's going on, with the Black Panthers and
the movement, because it was the same argument as when Du Bois and Best Foot Forward. One was saying, we have to do something. We can't just wait and take this more, take the civil, kind of a civil rights approach, a civil disobedience approach. We have to be more forceful. And so it's the same argument that comes up again with the Black Panthers. That was that discussion of blacks were divided as to how militant they would get, or there were groups that thought, no, we can't do that. We're just going to alienate anybody who would think about following us or helping us. So we don't want to do that. So it was about alienation, or not alienation. What was it? Gosh, it's not going to be one of those nights, is it? The inspiration was warming out today. It was about resistance, or open resistance or not, because we're not used to it, but folks used to carry guns around during this period. They could openly carry guns. But imagine if it's during the civil rights movement and you see a Black Panther carrying a gun. How is that going to, I bet the police weren't very happy with that. I'm just guessing, because they really hated the Black Panthers. And they just wanted to put them down. So you might watch that film or the documentary. It's pretty good. Just in case, whatever you want to do. All right. So to this time around, any questions about what's coming up? Anything else? I haven't started your what if papers yet, but I don't think it'll take me very long to grade those once I get started.
I had a quick question about the edited collection. So I was trying to think of how I'm going to section it, because I'm going to start putting more sources together.
Mm-hmm.
And after I get feedback from the sources that I have, but I was going to do like a section on scholarship on The Kite Runner, To Kill a Mockingbird, and Speak.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, I found several articles that didn't address those novels, but addressed how to teach sexual assault and violence in literature in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Could I make that a section, or should I stay away from pedagogy?
Yeah, stay away from pedagogy. Yeah. Because sometimes, and that goes sometimes into the area of bibliotherapy, about how, here's a book that this character is facing the same kinds of issues and crises that you are, and maybe if you read it, it might give you some, might make you feel like you're not alone in the world or something like that. So, and sometimes it goes off into that bibliotherapy. But yeah, I would avoid that. What is the overarching?
It was that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it did exactly what you said.
Okay.
And like how it impacts like young adult readers and students in the class, like high school setting. So, and that's where I was like, I don't know, because it's like you said, there's not a ton out there on it. So I feel like I need to broaden what I'm looking at specifically.
Is it violence or?
The article I was looking at was sexual assault, but I can broaden it to violence. And one article that I had that discussed the assault in The Kite Runner, I haven't read it, but when I read the article, the argument was basically that the author was using the sexual assault in the novel to help make a connection to the, I guess, how we viewed immigrants after 9/11, and specifically people from the Middle East.
Is Kite Runner an actual young adult novel?
I thought it was. When I was researching it, I found it in that genre.
Okay. I don't think it really is.
So should I change it?
Well, since let me look at what you've got.
Okay.
And I can see the whole thing with young adult literature, it is really hard to draw a line in the sand and say this is and this isn't, unless you have somebody who is actually specifically writing for a young adult audience and does so commonly, something like that. But mostly, I think adults, I think that was for an adult audience, mostly, but young people read it.
Something I struggled with whenever I was working on the If You Were To assignment was like, it's what we would call a young adult book, but they were calling it children's literature. And if I hadn't read it, then I didn't know if it qualified as young adult or not.
Children's literature is the umbrella.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying. So like if I hadn't read the original, like Return to Sender was one of the ones that was my primary text. I haven't read that. I don't know, like I know the basic premise, but like some of the articles I was finding were saying that it wasn't young adult. We're saying that it was children's, not specifically that it wasn't young adult. But
if they're having that argument, you can include it though.
Okay. It was just, I found the assignment tough because I hadn't read the primary sources that I was citing.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'd read one of them, but I hadn't read the other two.
Mm-hmm.
And that made it
Yeah,
interesting.
and that's what was hard for me because I read To Kill a Mockingbird and Speed.
So, and To Kill a Mockingbird isn't children's lit either, young adult.
Really? Oh no.
It was written for an adult audience. Young adults embraced it,
Yeah.
and they teach it in high school,
Yeah.
but they teach Shakespeare in high school.
Okay.
Can I make a suggestion? Might want to look into House on Maple Street. There's a sexual assault toward the end.
Okay.
It's a collection of poetry, short stories, and poetry by Sanders Cisneros.
I was going to look for something, and it was going to be an Amazon. What was it going to be? Oh, no, it wasn't going to be an Amazon. If a journal, a children's lit journal of some sort, takes up the topic, then yes. Let's see.
I was looking at like The Lion and the Unicorn, because it's
Mhm.
going to have children's lit in there, right?
Mhm.
Or the Children's Literature Association.
Mhm. Search within journal.
I was running into the same thing definitely because like if I'm doing the migration and endearment, then I was thinking like, okay, Farewell to Manzanar, like even because that's in the lit book, I'm familiar at least with part of it because they have an excerpt. But I'm like, okay, this is really young adult lit just because it's in the lit book doesn't mean, and it's for high schoolers doesn't mean it's young adult. So like, I was in the same.
Most of these things are reviews. Somebody used this one, if I'm not mistaken, for today's. Yep, I know they did. The White Gaze and Postmodern Triple Consciousness.
Are there any journals besides this one and The Lion and the Unicorn that focuses only on the umbrella children's lit?
Children's Literature Association Quarterly, Children's Literature, the annual,
Children's lit.
it comes out once a year. Lion and the Unicorn, Children's Literature and Education.
Those are the.
Those are the main ones.
It's not showing up as a major.
So in the next couple days, I change my mind on what I want to do topic on. Is that okay?
Okay, that's a book review. Because it says review. All right, so off we go then into the wild blue yonder. Well, this, I'll give you the title of one, Black Criminal Stereotypes and Racial Profiling, which makes perfect sense because, what did you all think about the novel?
I really liked it.
Did you?
I hate using the word liked, but I did too.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. Like
It engaged you.
yes, like the the letters to Martin, like, first I was like, the audacity of calling him okay by his first name. But then I was like, I really enjoyed the interaction that he had with that. Like, I thought that was really insightful, especially since it wasn't from a first person narrator. It was from the third person. So
Yeah, I like the mix. We get the first person view from his letters to Martin, and then we get third person omniscient from the other narrator, and then we get the news stories.
right.
Also, it's like it mixes all these different types of narration.
I really appreciate that.
As I was reading it, it reminded me a lot of Jody Picoult. And then when I went back to the back, she's really good friends with Jody. And Jody inspired her and like encouraged her to write it. So she was involved in the editing process of the novel. So it's really interesting.
Isn't that?
It's really interesting that they work so closely together because Jody released Small Great Things around the same time as this came out. And Small Great Things is about Ruth, an African-American Black character that like was put in jail for allegedly killing a white child, and she was a nurse. So, like, because it was so similar, the story.
And that you were thinking of that.
Well, and Small Great Things is what my students were reading at college, and I'm Jody, like I'm reading that alongside them, and it's just like this is just too similar. It's like, look this here. I saw the connections.
Yeah. Yeah. Other thoughts? Megan, what'd you think?
About the book itself, I absolutely loved it. I was reading it, and I had to keep stopping myself from reading it just so I could tell my family about it because it was so like I geek out over books and I have to share. Like it physically has to come out of me or I will explode. And there were these moments where I was so mad. I got to the point where Manny gets shot, and I wanted to like reach through the book and punch the off-duty cop myself. And it was just, it was that moment for me, and it was just like that eye-opening, like, wow, this actually happens. And I have been kind of like nose blind or sight blind or whatever kind of blind you want to call it. And it's just like that really like step back a second and go, wait a minute, this actually happened.
Yeah, and I was so frustrated with the white friends,
Jared.
Jared.
It was so frustrating. But his development by the end was a beautiful thing. Like how he acted by the end, it was great. It was like it started to click.
Yeah, but look what it took.
Yeah, right. Yeah, definitely.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say I was really frustrated with the defense attorney. Like I realized that she was doing what she was supposed to do, but I felt like she was badgering him, and the judge wasn't doing anything to keep that from happening, and that made me angry too. I'm like, would you just let the boy talk? Like he's 18, just chill. And 17, whatever happened, yeah. And so, yeah, I was upset at that whole scene because I'm just like, I didn't feel like he got to convey his side of the story. I felt like she distorted it, and the judge allowed it.
Very much so.
I really like the couple relationship too. That was developed nicely and really maybe that could change a few lines. I don't know. But it was open.
I like how he brought the
part of what I want
historical aspect in, like the, I guess, journaling, but the letters. I think that for young adults who would be reading that novel, it's kind of good to see that, you know, he is, I guess, trying to do something with history. That makes it a little more relevant to them when they can connect to it in that way. I read the book in like 3 hours because we were driving to Evelyn's appointment in Galveston. And my husband was like, are you going to talk to me? And I was like, oh no, this book is good. Like, I was getting car sick and I would not put the book down. I put in my, like when I submitted my stuff, like this was the best one so far. Like loved it, recommended it to all my students. I was like, listen, this is probably, because they're 12. So I was like, this is probably a little, mature for y'all, but you should really read this book anyway. It's, but I really like that aspect of it, that they, that Nick Stone brought in the Martin Luther King. I think that made it so much more intense.
Yeah, it gave lots of historical context. Yeah, and one of the things I kept wanting to say, all through it, when he's kind of saying, well, what would Martin do? Or what would Martin say? Or how would he react? I just kept wanting to say, they kill him. That's what happens. They kill Martin Luther King Jr. So how are you gonna work with that, with his civil disobedience, and writing from the jail and nonviolence and that kind of thing? How are you going to deal with that? Because they kill him. And I wondered how much of that, how much history our kids know. For instance, do they know about Martin Luther King Jr.? Do you think?
Well,
I don't think they know enough. I don't think they know enough.
Like we, at least in the curriculum for my district, like the I Have a Dream speech is in freshman curriculum. The letters from the Birmingham jail are in the sophomore curriculum. But, just because it's there doesn't mean it's taught to fidelity.
And I think it's perpetuated more as a myth of this man who, rose to greatness and then he was assassinated. But he was this idea of civil rights.
Yeah, mythologized. Yeah, and well, so I'm wondering, as young people are reading it, if they know what happens to Martin Luther King Jr. in the end, so that they're becoming acquainted with King through justice, and then in the end they find out, well, he dies, and of course so does none of the names are sticking today. His friend Manny, and so does Manny, and both of them for all these good students, and that cop, which I hated so much.
There's a lot going on. And I liked the class discussions that they had.
Oh yeah.
I really liked those. I think the dialogue was written really well, and I thought that that's when you kind of saw how different each individual was, and how you have Manny who's struggling with his identity in one way, and then you have Justice who's struggling in a different way, and arguably you have Jared who has this very construed, very messed up view, but he's also struggling with his identity. And just the fact that he's so bitter because he feels like his white privilege has then in turn become that he is not privileged. And so that
pisses him off.
And it makes him mad. Yeah.
It's not fair that I don't have privilege.
But he got into, it's Yale, but he's still mad. He's still mad because he feels like, Justice didn't deserve it.
Yeah.
And he only got in because,
He tells Justice, you took my spot.
Yeah.
Not a spot, my spot.
My spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was such a problem. But, I get that reaction when I start talking about white privilege and how that works. I get the reaction of, that's not how it is. And the very same things that Jared says.
Yeah.
That's reality. Those are some of the things I'll hear. So yeah, it was really realistic. I loved it that they were such smart kids all the way around. debaters, of course, they're debaters, you know, that made it especially appropriate for them to be doing what they're doing and they're engaging in those discussions. Yeah.
And then Justice's mom, when she finds out that he's dating, and then she is struggling with that as well. There was so much in the book.
So much tension, so much struggle.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Very much. And relatable too.
Mm-hmm.
Very relatable.
Yeah. And so Manny gets shot and killed. You know, I don't know if you've been keeping up with the news with the female police officer who shot the young black man, and in his own apartment, thinking that she was walking into her own apartment. Their star witness, I don't know if you know this, he was gunned down and killed a couple of days ago, maybe. And so I'm just thinking at that time that who's done this? Was it other cops are really angry that she got prison time and convicted? Was it the Klan or some kind of white supremacists who are saying, not in my town. She's going to jail because this guy testified, not in my town. Yeah. So I don't know. I kind of tend to think it might be white supremacists who did it. Who knows? So it really, really does remain so relevant. Because you can wonder if she would have shot him if he'd been white, or if she felt threatened because he was black. I don't know.
Not here in the trial, you don't know, but I thought all along it sounded pretty unbelievable not to know it was a place. It was so hard for me to understand it. I mean, I don't pretend to put myself in her shoes because I can't know. I can't know. But you go in and not know somebody else's apartment.
And as a police officer, aren't you supposed to have a better mind for?
Because they said she was distracted because she was texting her boyfriend or something.
Yeah, she was very distracted.
Yeah, but they said there was a
red mat.
Yes.
But if she's not looking down.
Right. And well, she did park on the wrong level, so she was used to going in whatever level where she parked, you know. But he wasn't. I mean, I don't know what this witness said. I didn't know this witness was killed, but he wasn't threatening. He wasn't even armed. He was just minding his own business in his apartment. So when they're not a threat, do you shoot them anyway? I mean, you know.
Well, if you think somebody's in your apartment.
Well, if they would go away, I mean, I would want them to be arrested, but I would, I wouldn't shoot them unless they were coming at me. I mean, maybe they trained you to do that. I don't know what their training is.
I kept asking myself if the roles had been reversed, how that trial was.
Oh, a black shooting a white.
Yeah. Oh, you
my
know
gosh.
exactly
Yeah,
what would have happened.
Yeah.
It would have been over.
Except
done
it
a long
would have
time
been,
ago.
except it would have been a longer
Yeah.
sentence.
Yeah.
A longer sentence, for sure. So this person did they shoot? They get shot? Do you know what happened?
They shot him down.
Yeah.
Several gunshots to the chest.
And they got away?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
They don't know who did it.
But it was retaliation. I don't think there's any question about that.
Not coincidence.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's see if anybody does anything about it. Okay, Kirsty, yours is up. Keeping It Real, Walter Dean Myers, and the Promise of African American Children's Literature. What brought you to that article?
Well, I honestly don't remember what I searched, but it was part of my bibliography. It was one that I had I just kind of compiled I just have like a running lists of articles that I have come across for my bibliography. So when we got this assignment, I kind of started with my list and kind of went back and, thought, what could I, use from that I already kind of know about. So that's why I got to this. So it was probably something about race and trauma that brought me here. But then, I read all the way through it and I was just like, oh my gosh, he's literally describing everything in this book. Like, Elaine is basically just saying that we need more holistic literature that shows what, minorities in general, but particularly African Americans actually go through. And that really that's the only way that anything's going to ever change is if we are showing real experiences of racism, basically, is what he's saying. And of course, the Walter Dean Myers wrote another book that I'm using for my or that I think I'm going to use for my final project. So that, that in the title caught me, although this is talking about this article was talking about a different book, Somewhere in
Monster?
the Darkness. And this one's talking about Somewhere in the Darkness, and I'm using Monster for my project.
Okay, yeah. Monster, and have you read Monster? It is brilliant.
Yeah.
It is brilliant because the kid that the protagonist he's on trial for murder.
Right.
Yeah, no, he was
Burglary.
as an accessory
Right.
to murder because he drives a car, I think, that his friends break into a liquor store and shoot and kill the clerk, and he drives the car. So driving the car is just as bad as shooting, the way it's set up. And so, but he's also, he's writing a script he's been taking film classes, and he's really interested in that. And what's so fascinating about it, if you really get into it, you'll find out that maybe he's just creating this whole thing, that it's just the film script, that he didn't really get, he's not really on trial. It really is just a film script. So it's brilliant. It's a brilliant novel. And it always elicits lots of discussion when I use it, because I have used it before.
Well, I just thought it was interesting that he brings up, Lane in the article brings up this double image, and he's like, African Americans are only represented in two ways, either, like money hungry superstars or gangsters. There's never any like happy medium. And then that's exactly how Justice it kind of seems like that's how Justice feels. Like, he sees these really successful people, and then he sees, I can't remember the guy he goes and visits in the jail. He sees these people like that. So he never, and he struggles with that so much. He's like, okay, so if this is all there is, where do I fit in?
Yeah, and he's
so
going
I really
to jail.
liked that, I really liked that connection between the article and the novel.
Julian, Race, Violence, and Neoliberalism, Crime Fiction of the Era of Ferguson and Black Lives Matter.
This was a very interesting article.
I guess so.
So, I was trying to find something that dealt with either Black Lives Matter, or I started with the school to prison pipeline, because they mentioned that whenever he goes and talks to Quan, and he's like, it looks like a school, it looks like a prison, and that's something that concerns me where I am in my urban school. And so, but I couldn't find anything particularly that I liked with this, since this is not exactly crime fiction. It still deals with crime, and we have the courtroom, the whole 9 yards. And so this article went through how several, like 3 different authors dealt with crime fiction. And so one of them is a co-writer for The Wire. And so he was talking about how, it's not the police's fault. We shouldn't blame them for any brutality. Like, they're just doing their jobs and people are getting in the way, pretty much. This other guy is on the opposite side. It's like, it's all the police's fault. The only way we can change anything is if we rise up and if we enact violence and we have our groups and we are very active. And then, and he portrays that through his novel, which is called No Plan B. And then there's this last guy, and he presents basically a series of vignettes in the life of this African-American male. And he doesn't tell you what to think. It lets you come to your own conclusions. And so this was just talking about, like, this is how other people are dealing with police brutality and with the deaths of African-American males, especially recently in this era. And it was interesting to compare how Nick Stone wrote with how these people wrote. Mm-hmm. So, because it wasn't necessarily young adult fiction. Actually, it wasn't young adult fiction at all. It was crime fiction, but it was still interesting to see how they were portraying the crimes.
How did you even find that?
I typed in Black Lives Matter.
Okay.
I was honestly looking for a couple of articles that I read in Jess's class whenever we did cultural rhetorics, mm-hmm. and whenever we were studying African American rhetorics, but I didn't even think about going and looking at the folder that she gave us because they were all there. And so I was actually looking for one of the articles that we had read. And so that's why I typed in Black Lives Matter. Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Oh, yours was long.
It was long. I told you I'm wordy, sorry.
Points to Walter Mosley. Okay, always outnumbered. I've read some Walter Mosley before, and he wrote a really strange adolescent novel. It was called 48, and it's about African American. I think it's an African myth of Big John, or it might be African American myth of Big John, but it also has to do with aliens from other planets. It's bizarre.
Well, and he was the one that did the short interrelated moments in the life of this character, and so like the authors really liked the way he did it.
Yeah, I like Walter Mosley's crime fiction. I've read plenty of it.
I love crime fiction, so it was like.
Yeah, me too. Oh, and by the way, I started with, when I copy and paste from the documents, it does not, formats don't transfer over. So things that would normally be italicized aren't. And I wasn't going to go through and do it because that was going to take me forever to get done. And I didn't have that kind of time. Katie, you picked Apart and Apart. Students of Color Negotiating Boundaries at an Elite Boarding School. Why, that was a great find.
I really, really liked it. So it basically talked kind of, I think it was Kirsty's article that was similar, talking about what this group called two-ness. Like, they kind of felt like they had to split themselves apart. So they were one person within their like elite white society at school, and then like a different version of themselves when they were around their Black peers. And so I felt like it was a lot how Justice, like everyone else has been saying, like how he has to be one person at school, but then he's another person when he goes back home. And it was really aligned to the text, actually. But so this particular article goes through, I think it's 8 different case studies, sort of students who are in these like elite boarding schools. and how they have to choose to either like assimilate into like their like white elite, or if they're going to kind of reject that in a way. I think I don't know, it's really interesting. My child is running in and out. I'm sorry.
It's all right. I thought as much. Well, so I like the way that the author places Justice and Manny in this very white elite school, and that they're so very bright, and that rejects the stereotypes that are so frequently associated with Black males.
And it just seems
I really like
accurate according to like these like personal studies or whatever that this article went through. Like whatever Dear Martin went, it seemed to be really like an accurate portrayal of that struggle. So that was cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Du Bois talked about the double consciousness and how the Black man had to basically straddle a line of how he perceives himself and how others perceive him. And he was speaking directly about Black men in this instance, and that how that gets balanced, how they balance that kind of division. Alex, critical conversations on whiteness with young adult literature.
So this article kind of picked apart the Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian and Speak, and kind of looked at what the characters were going through, like what identities they were having to navigate intersectionally.
Mm-hmm. And I've read both, and I was pretty taken with Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian when it came out, and I taught it a couple of times. I don't go near it now because of Alexi's the accusations about him, being sexually threatening. I don't know how to put it exactly.
Being a predator.
Yeah. Honestly, I just think a lot of people with money are like that. I do. I hate to say that.
That made the news?
Oh yeah. It was all during that, when it was really coming out every other day. 2 or 3 people were being, he was accused of that. But in Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, Junior fights that whole, he wants to be, he doesn't want to be white, but he wants the privilege that comes with being white, and how he's going to the school at the reservation, and then, but then I think he goes to a white school after that, right, and plays basketball and stuff, and how he negotiates that, him being an Indian, and then being around all these white guys. And it's illustrated. Greg, your turn. The ambivalence of Black rage, out of comparative literature and culture.
Yes, ma'am. I thought this was a pretty good article. I found it when I was kind of looking for some articles for the other paper, and ran across this one. And as I was reading through it, I thought that it really did a good job of mirroring this novel. Is the author here, Vincent Lloyd, kind of starts off with looking at writers from the civil rights movement, and then as they work their way up, how that shifted from the civil, peaceful protest on up to like the Black Power movement, and then it settled back down, and then it, after the Trayvon Martin shooting, how that really got folks advocating toward change and pushing and really understanding their rage. And so I thought that mirrored it never mentioned our book, but I thought it really mirrored how you have Justice as he starts off with his writings about Dear Martin, and he also has to understand his rage as he goes through the experiences that he has, and how to and how to articulate that. And I found that interesting because as Vincent Lloyd is talking about how they folks are trying to find their voice and their ownership of of this rage. He's struggling on who he can talk to and how to understand and what to go with, what to resist, and what to advocate for. I thought it was a good article, and I agree with everyone. I didn't say it earlier. I really enjoyed this book too. I found myself. I thought the writer did a really good job playing on all pieces of emotions, and I enjoyed it.
Pretty amazing how authors can manipulate us, isn't it? Really is, because I mean, I'm so angry early on and consistently with the justice and injustice.
I was texting Alex and I'm like, I have so much trepidation. Like, I can't help but keep going, but I don't want to because I know bad things are going to happen.
Bad things are going to happen.
And I just don't want to go there. It's so, like, I was just inching forward, just like all tense.
How many of you have read something, The Hate You Give? Anybody?
Katie has.
Katie? Are these two books kind of similar?
Yes. Have you read it?
No, I have not been able to bring myself to do it.
It's really, really good. But it's very similar in terms of the speaker, like the vocalizer. She's kind of on the inside and the outside of conflict at the same time. I feel like how Justice is. It's very similar, actually. The tone's very similar. The voice is very similar. They're both really good.
Okay. And I assume people get killed?
Yes.
In the Hate You Give?
And this is not a spoiler. It's like the first chapter. She's in the car when a friend of hers gets killed. And it turns out that he was like being initiated into a gang or something like that. But she wasn't aware of that, and they'd been friends for a long time, and she goes to like a fancy prep school, but he doesn't, and so it's all televised, the court hearings televised, all of it, just very similar to Dear Martin. Very
and
good.
There seems to be, if you could connect that with Monster, that would be pretty interesting too, I bet. Greg wrote a lot too. Emily. Beyond Dreams and Mountains, Martin King's challenge to the arc of history.
So I just really liked that Martin Luther King kind of had a role in this, even though it was just the letters that Justice wrote to him. I felt like he kind of became a character as the novel went on. And in that way, he was kind of an outlet for Justice. So Justice was able to really kind of put out all of his emotions and his thoughts and get that out of his head and put it on paper when he was writing to Martin. And so it became kind of this space for him to work through his identity and be heard. Even though they weren't obviously being read by Martin Luther King, that wasn't the point. And so he kind of became this moving character that helped Justice find himself and identify with himself, even though the communication was just one way. So I wanted to look into how Martin Luther King just does this even today to people who need that kind of hope, who need that inspiration, because I've looked to Martin Luther King for inspiration, but not in the same way that Justice did. And so when I saw how much hope and how he continually thought, what would Martin do? And then at the end, it was, who would Martin be? I was like, is this something that is seen a lot for people who feel marginalized against? Do they look for figures like him. And I found this article, and I found out that yes, they do, and in fact, people should look to him more, especially today, and it should be included more in literature and just in the classrooms in general, because he's still a moving and influential figure even today.
Mm-hmm.
So I liked that.
Yeah, he remains, well, got a holiday.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do something
I
here.
think
I
it's-
don't know. Go
I
ahead.
think it's interesting that even though justice is literally surrounded by so much violence, he looks to, Martin Luther King Jr., who was known, or is known for, his nonviolence. And he keeps remarking on that, like, how did you do this in such a nonviolent way? How did you stand up against all of this? Okay, how did you stand up against this in such a nonviolent way?
I know. Yeah, how difficult would that be? How nearly impossible would that be? Yeah.
I think I almost think even more so now. I mean, because now it impacts like children, and they're just so impulsive. I just think it would be even harder now to react in a non-violent manner, because it's happening at even younger of an age. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree because a young person has not necessarily learned that self-discipline to turn that, to turn the other cheek, or hot-blooded, hot-tempered, feeling the inequality, the unfairness of it all, and how, that's what, kids that I've seen, they get outraged when something isn't right, isn't just, isn't fair, and they want to do something about it. Now, they don't always have the tools to manage to do that in productive ways, and instead it can turn out in harmful ways, but and through anger. And then if they keep getting it over and over and over again, then that anger is only going to build.
I forgot yours. I'm sorry. I typed yours in and I copied and pasted it, but it didn't show up in my.
Mine?
Yeah.
Oh.
Do you remember what it was?
Yeah, it is race and reaction, divergent views of police violence and protest against.
Mm-hmm. Okay, would you talk about it?
Yeah, okay, yeah, of course. So, my article is about race and reaction, and the reason I've chosen this article is that the authors of this article point to police violence against African American as a vivid indicator of systematic racism. Okay, they argue that Black African Americans are 7 times actually more likely to be killed by the white police officers than the white men. And they also argue that African Americans show more serious reaction to such acts of violence than the white people. So, for instance, they they mentioned some examples, like, for example, the 17-year-old Martin, who is African American, but who was killed in 2013 by a white cop, but the police officer who was a murderer was acquitted simply by a verdict of not guilty. And when the Black people protested against such a kind of injustice, the white people said that it was a kind of self-defense. Also, they argued that
African Americans react to think about such kinds of protests more positively than the white people. So they think that it is effective actually to show their protest. But and also they call it a kind of legitimate outrage, while the white people call it a kind of opportunistic criminals. I mean, the African Americans protests. And then back to Dear Marty, I think the main character, Justice, okay, he's an African American, but he's completely aware of the injustice in the world that he's living. And the incidents that he witnessed in his life opens his mind more about such kinds of injustice, the flagrant injustice that he sees, the climax of which is when he loses his best friend, Manny, and Manny is killed only because of listening to loud music in his own car. So he starts actually writing those letters to Martin Luther as a kind of protest. He gives voice to his concerns and protests through the letters that he writes to Martin Luther. So exactly the same as the authors of the article say he believes in the effectiveness of showing his protests, in his case in the form of letters that he writes. Also, his friend Manny, who is killed by the police officer, again, this police officer is acquitted for the same reason that the murder of Martin in the article was acquitted. So I think both the article and the novel, the article actually helps us understand such vivid and flagrant injustice in the world. Exactly this, somehow the same examples that we see in the article is also mentioned in this novel.
I did have yours. This is it, isn't it? I just forgot to put your name on it.
Oh yeah.
Yay! Okay, good. Thanks.
Thank you.
That's funny. And then I didn't put the name on this one. Does anybody recognize it? McKinney illustrates.
That was the end of mine.
Oh, never mind. Never mind. Andrea.
Oh, okay. I've been spending a lot of this time that we've been talking, trying to remember what I talked about. And this reminds me very, okay. So in the novel, it talks a lot about how Kwan went to a different school compared to Justice's school. And I understand that completely because I transferred in between my high school years and in between my schooling from my mom in between a predominantly black school to a predominantly white school because of my mom's fear that I was turning too black. And so because of that, this novel led me to this. So it talks about school segregation and how it's institutionalized not only in our governments, but in our society and how we separate ourselves. We naturally do it, but it's reinforced by how our governments have set it up for us. It doesn't go into redlining the article and how the history behind all of that nonsense went on, but it does talk about how our prejudice and racism and segregation just perpetuated even after we desegregated schools. The desegregated schools continue to not continue to desegregate. Like once we disallowed segregation, it was like, okay, we did it, but we're not going to continue doing it. We just kind of quit. We didn't enforce it.
Yeah.
The enforcement just stopped. So it just goes on into details talking about that and comparing it to Justice and how he was one of 2 or 3 in the beginning, black students, and then at the end, one of 1. And he says one of he didn't really say, one of.
I think he's the only.
He's the only one left
Mhm.
because they all die by the hands of another person. So that's why I was really drawn to this article and how it connects to his life.
So these different articles that you've been reading, how much searching did you do to actually find them? I mean, part of why have you do searches is so that you'll encounter a lot of different articles. And I just wonder if that's what happens with you. That you're not going to read them all, but you encounter them.
It did for me. This one took me longer.
Do what?
I said it does that exact for me. So it took me a while to find the article for this particular one, and I get really lost in articles, so I realize I pretty much am reading almost everything. So I'm like, oh,
you can't do that.
You
can't do that.
Especially because we're not doing. I noticed that for this particular one, I kept running into articles that dealt with how to teach this kind of thing in class, which we're steering away from right now. So I noticed, I would just, as a teacher, I was just very interested. So I would get halfway through and be like, oh, I can't even use this. And so, but it is good. It's very informative.
Yeah, good. That's what I want. So Jennifer, it just happens that you're up. Property penalty and racial profiling.
Yeah, this article was really interesting. I'm kind of a history buff anyway. I love history. And so one of the best parts about the novel to me was just that inclusion of Martin Luther. And so I was kind of excited to see. This one was just very historical. It really just gives a background on, where racial profiling came from. And I learned a lot. There's a lot of stuff I had no idea. I don't know if I was blind or never learned it. I don't know. But so it kind of chronicles all kinds of talking about associating Blackness with criminality and obviously linking that to Dear Martin and just the injustices that justice faces. And the cool thing, one of the cool things about the article was it discusses like the tangible aspects of like where profiling came from and things like that I didn't know about. So I never realized that all the way back to, it talks about like white Southern, historical Southern slavery and things like that. And talking about how we've come obviously not very far since then in profiling, but it details like jail cells and things like that were originally like spots where slaves would wait to be sold and things like that. And that was where they spent a lot of their time. So it was interesting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I didn't know that. And so it talks about that slaves were taken to jail. So like before they were for jail, they were taken to be cells, to be disciplined, or to be waiting to be sold. And then they turned those into jail cells eventually. So they were literally built for African Americans. And stripes and things like that were just another word for lashing and whips and things like that. And then of course the outfit for being in jail for the longest time were stripes. And so just all these connections that can be really tragic, and it's just I never knew the history kind of behind all of that, but it kind of chronicles the evolution of like laws and mandates and things like that, but sort of always holding to those unfortunate original principles and not really kind of drawing back from them very much. And so just in terms of history, I found from the article, but really it just talks about kind of where that racial profiling comes from on the law enforcement side and that association of Blackness with criminality.
It never even occurred to me to think about where profiling comes from. I just think of it as it is.
Yeah, and I never gave a lot of thought either. I was looking up racial profiling just because like right off the bat, in early on in the book, like chapter 1, I think it's, that's when all that happens with justice. But I was trying to look up privilege, and like I said, I ended up getting lost in a lot of articles about teaching those kinds of things. And then I segued into teaching essentially race in the classroom. And then that ended up, I saw this article and it just lays out the whole history of where that came from. Cause I don't think I gave it a whole lot of thought. Like I knew slavery existed, and that was kind of the extent of why I assumed that we had that attitude, but why it's still present. But I never, like I said, the tangible aspects, like so consciously done. It was really powerful.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to read that because I kind of want to get that history as
There's
well.
like writings and stuff that they include, like interviews from the 30s from ex-slaves and things like that that are really heartbreaking. Yeah.
I'm sure. Maybe I don't want to read it. Jennifer Walker. It's race acting, the varied and complex affirmative meaning of acting Black for African American adolescents.
I feel like throughout the novel, I can't talk today, so bear with me. They kind of negotiate how to act their race, kind of. And this article was talking about race acting, and it reminded me of like gender performance. And I actually made a note to myself because they mentioned acting gender and they didn't mention other. Just kind of rude. But they did a study with a sample of 115 adolescents and asked them what acting Black means to them and gave them the opportunity to answer 3 times. And what they found was that the answers usually lean towards ghetto or superiority. And I feel like that negotiation happens, I marked a few pages, in the novel whenever he's saying, it never made sense to me why trying to do something with myself, maybe some kind of race traitor to these guys, talking about Trey.
Yeah.
So I feel like he's negotiating that race acting. And also, this part on page 103, it says, the Black kids expected me to know all the cultural references and slang, and the white kids expected me to act Black. So whenever that stood out to me, so I wanted to find an article that was talking about acting Black.
How about that? And you found it. So that's interesting as to the choices that they, the descriptors they landed on for themselves. And if somebody said to me, acting white means, I wouldn't even know where to begin.
But the article talked about how they compared it against the idea of acting white and how that usually the connotation of that is superiority and intelligence, and how the opposite of acting Black usually has negative connotations. But the study showed that it was kind of had double meanings.
Interesting. Shay. Hello.
Sorry, I was getting on to a child.
Surviving recognition and racial injustice.
Yeah, I actually really liked this article just because one thing that I noticed a lot in Dear Martin was he was just trying to be recognized for who he, like, in the struggle of trying to figure out who he was himself, he wanted to be recognized for whatever he was. And so when I came across this article, I thought this would be great. Let's see. Hesford, I think, Wendy Hesford. What she did is she actually broke down recognition into like 5 separate types of recognition. She calls it dialectical recognition, intersectional recognition, human rights recognitions in between, and post-racial recognitions. And what she does is she discusses how each one really kind of flows and evolves into the other. But there's no real temporal, or she says temporal or critical progression. So just all kind of just conglomerate. And
so in these progressions, what might be in those categories?
Well, like as far as the dialectical recognitions, that's more that particular type of recognition was, for the hierarchical within the structural inequalities. for each individual. And then like within the human rights recognitions, it discusses like liberalism, state accountability, and things of that sort. And so what she did is hold on, I had to pull up the article because I've attempted to sleep since then. She wants to tie all these to how racial politics and racial injustice within the United States can be tied to idea of recognition. Although she ends up in her conclusion, she ends up, oh goodness, sorry, my computer's frozen. She concludes that it's not something that is going to be easy to figure out. There's a lot of identity constructs and appropriations and things of that sort that comes with recognition that it's difficult to really separate it from politics and things of that sort. And how did she put it? There it is. She said even though inner spaces in all of the recognition subcategories, you can find usable forms. They all each have their perils. And so what she wanted to stress was like the in-betweens. She says the in-between relinquishes recognition from unyielding normative identity constructs, appropriation, and the state's surveillance of the black body. And so she stresses more the need for recognition, even in its misrecognition. So I found that really fascinating in connection to Dear Martin, because throughout the entire novel, he's trying to not only recognize himself for what he is, but he's trying to get others to recognize him as his individual, and also the injustices around his race, everything that just seems to pop up. So that's
well, good. I'm glad you found that art. Jeannie, girlness and guyness, gender trouble in young adult literature. What did you find out from this?
Well, I you took my notes off. I was first attracted to this title because it's really only a problem because of their race, their gender, I mean. So that's what I initially took from the title. And I so often read articles that talk about books that I don't know, that I was unaware that this was reading. So anyway, it gave advice, and some of it it criticized in that it said it was prescriptive, and it was, but I said to Martin, but good advice still. Things like, which I thought fit Justice and SJ, that it fit things like be your own person and don't change what you like or dislike just to be part of the crowd. Now, that was really SJ, she was really an individual. And be proud of yourself. And I thought in general, these kids were, Jared especially, and not to be so much part of the crowd. And then one place talked about that, I hadn't really thought of this, but it talked about that there's often can be a symbol for leaving childhood. And I thought, Manny's death was really kind of one for justice, and Jared's mellowing was really his leaving his childhood, and Justice and SJ's ability to grow into the facts of their feelings. So that's what
Okay.
I did have one other thing on the topic of advice, though. This is only on the novel, though. If you want me to hold it, I can't.
No, you can go ahead.
You know, the fact that they're right in that the punishment for loud music is not death.
Right.
And that has to be portrayed for sure. But I kind of thought that it kind of, by emphasizing that they were right, they never gave the other argument. And I thought that that might be kind of dangerous implied advice.
What other argument?
The argument that don't fight with somebody you don't know. You know, they could pull out a gun and shoot you, which is my policy at a grocery store or anywhere else. You know, no matter what they say, I get out of their way, you know.
I've not always followed that advice.
Yeah, and it's more and more necessary, I think. And so I just thought, I don't know if there was an implicit kind of a dangerous, I mean, just being right isn't enough. I guess it's part of my thinking.
Well, we're supposed to see the injustice of playing music, and of course we're thinking, don't do it, because we know that something's coming up.
Yes, but I wonder if kids are thinking that, is what I was saying. I'm not so sure that the audience, I mean, we are as adults for sure. And maybe, I don't know if that would be taught in the classroom or not, but you just sure got to pick your battles. And I just found it interesting that they didn't really ever get around to, even though he was right.
Well, there are reasons that he was so angry, though. Mm-hmm. You know, he was angry.
Right.
They're not going on their hike because he needed to talk some things out because he's so very angry. That's so, right. I mean, I don't.
There were conversations with the parents and things like that. I don't know. Maybe it wouldn't be. Maybe it would be panned if that were there. I don't know. But it just occurred to me that I don't know how you could do it, but I'm not going to offer for children. But
well, and it's part of the plot. He's got to get shot.
Oh, he's got to get shot for sure. But I just thought that, he's got to get shot. Mm-hmm. I just thought that somewhere in there, somebody could have said, man, we got to learn that we've got to.
But see, that's what they have. That's part of what this is fighting against, is that
yes,
I have to self-monitor myself because I'm black.
Right.
And I'm tired of doing that.
Well, but I guess, well, and what year did this book come out?
2016?
I mean, I'm white and I monitor. So I guess my message wouldn't be that you have to monitor because you're black.
But that's why he has to. That's why he has to. It's not so much that
well, you're right. They probably wouldn't shoot me if I had my radio up high. But you never know. I mean, they'll shoot you for nothing. They'll shoot you for $1. So maybe right. I'm just a scary cat because I'm old.
Yeah, I have. I've had those impulses, and I followed up on them, and I shouldn't have.
Yep,
I lived in Illinois, and I was getting my PhD, and I'm pretty sure there was a lot of drug dealing going around in the apartment the complex I lived in, and somebody pulled up and started honking their horn at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I went outside and I told them they should never ever do that again. And I really just was so angry because it scared me and my heart was beating real fast, and I was so angry that they had woken me up, and I just went down and gave it to them. I could have been shot so easily.
Yes. Yeah, I can look back on my lifetime too and see places where, I just was lucky.
But for him, because he's black, it is so much more dangerous.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Yes.
I think that's what really wrote. Can y'all hear me? Because this thing's being
yes.
Okay. I think that's like what really drove this home for me. Like, so I think it was 2 years ago. well, yeah, it was 2 years ago. I was pulled over for speeding on my own street. And my dad was a cop for 28 years in the Air Force, so I know what to do. So I keep my wallet in this little cubby in my car. And so before I reached for it, I asked the officer, you know, is it okay if I get my wallet? It's in this little cubby. And he just jumped down my throat. He was so rude to me. Like, I'm just very respectful because I cry when I get a speeding ticket. Like, I'm a big baby. And so I was just like, you know, he was like, well, why do you have a gun? And he was just like chewing me out. And I was like, no, like I'm crying. I'm like, no, but my dad was a cop and I just know I need to ask and blah, 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 blah. And I remember how that moment made me feel. Granted, it was the anniversary of my sister's death, so I was already emotional, but I went as far as to call his supervisor and explain what happened and was like, listen, I was in the wrong, you know, I did my defensive driving. I paid what I needed to pay. I didn't have a problem with getting the ticket. I had a problem with the way I was treated. And he was reprimanded for it. And I only know that because I know people in the police department. But when I was reading this, I guess Stone wrote it with such great voice for justice that I was just like, if I was that distraught about it, I cannot imagine, you know, how justice felt or how any of these other people feel when it happens to them. So I always, you know, I knew that these things happened because it happened to me and I'm a white female, but
about the least threatening.
You know, I guess I just feel like I was like, this book just opened my eyes so much more to like, it took me back to that moment and how awful I felt and how just, I was just torn up about it. And it wasn't because I got the ticket, you know, it was because he was just so ugly to me for no reason, you know, and I didn't grow up with that. I grew up with, you know, police officers who respected everyone because, you know, I don't know. That's just who my dad was working with and who worked for him. And it just really took me, I was like, wow, like this really happens and it's so much worse for other people.
Yes. Yeah, very definitely.
It's very eye-opening.
You know, a million years ago when the very start of what we term now road rage, I knew a guy, well, it worked in a big office, and I worked there too, and nicest guy in the world, gray hair, nice guy, not threatening. And I never really knew all the details, but something happened on the highway, and this is back when, like I said, there wasn't even, there might not even been a term for it yet, and stupidly, they both pulled off, and I don't know which one of them I did, but anyway, I don't think it was a wreck, but they got, you know, and he got nearly beaten to death on the side of the road. And I remember from that day forward, you know, thinking, man, if it could happen to him, I'm sure he didn't get out, you know, brandish a weapon or even berate the person very much, or at all, maybe, I don't know. He's probably the one who did the sin, you know, cut him off accidentally or something. But anyway, it just made me realize going forward that you don't know who you're dealing with.
Never. I walk into school.
So true.
I don't. The first thought as I started classes this semester is, please let us all stay safe. Please let no one come in with a gun. And now that I always have my path figured out or know what I'm going to do, it will happen.
Well, you know, the door's locked automatically, right? From the outside. But the problem is if somebody goes to the bathroom, then they come back, you don't know really who's on the other side of the door when they're tapping, you know. And it's very scary.
Megan, it's your turn. You have police killings and their spillover effects on the mental health of Black Americans, a population-based quasi-experimental study. I don't know about the use of quasi, but okay.
It's a mouthful, isn't it?
Yeah.
I found a lot of research, but nothing that really tied into the novel as much as this one did for me. At the very beginning of the book, we see the little subtle hints to just how ingrained it is into justice. Even when he's getting arrested, he thinks back about, oh, my mama told me what I need to do during this situation. I put my hands up. I'm making sure that they can see them. I'm always respectful. And you have to kind of take that as your starting point for what exactly happens. And I love that this article looks into real life cases of this happening, of police brutality, of things like that, and what has happened to those actual survivors or to the families of the victims that didn't get to survive, that didn't survive, that didn't make it. And then I liked the fact that it kind of gives us the cipher that we need to look into his mental state as the novel progresses, when it starts off with his arrest, and then when Manny gets killed, and then the court case following that, and just everything else that piles on top, as well as hinting about how he thinks his dad's PTSD should have been treated or could have been treated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, when you have young men being shot all around you pretty frequently, and you see it on the news, and you hear reports on it frequently, I'd have to think that these young men are born into PTSD. They don't have a chance. They feel threatened at all times just being alive, I would think. That's what I would think.
And honestly, even in, and I know that half of the time he's talking about going back to his neighborhood where his mom lives, but I think you can make that disconnect between Justice and these other guys that are in the Black Jihad, or like Quan, that are in jail, because he's living on campus at his fancy rich boarding school, which is mostly predominantly Caucasian, and like where he's a serious minority. So you can start to kind of make that disconnect where you really don't you really can't have the flexibility to make that disconnect, because it's all happening to him. And you have to remember, oh, well, yes, he's from this neighborhood, but look, I don't even associate all of this stuff happening to him because he's from this neighborhood. Like, it's a secondary thought.
Right. Hi, Katie.
Hi.
What's your daughter's name?
This is Adeline. She had
Hi, Adeline.
a sick day today, so we're all still in our office. So we're
okay.
Preemie.
Jeremy, what you got to say for, what's the name of the article? I didn't include it.
Oh yeah, I put it at the end.
Yeah.
It is. It's called.
Hold on. Did I get it?
It's called The Hustle Sweetheart: Black Life Matters, the Police State, and Politics of Colonizing Anger in Zootopia.
Oh yeah, Zootopia.
Disney reference. Go, Jeremy.
Yay. I love animal studies, so that caught my attention on this one. But I was very interested in how most of the issues that they discussed were directly related to Dear Martin. Racialization, so the idea that someone's race is not an actual biological thing, it is a construct of the people around them. And the one quote, which I didn't include, of course, in my thing, that made me think of that is when Justice's mom says, if it looks white, it's white in this world. That's her perception of Mello. Because she looks white, so she's white, as far as she's concerned. And Sarah Jane as well, because she's Jewish. Well, it doesn't matter if she's Jewish, because she looks white.
Right.
And then the idea of racism is based around the concept that there are a few bad people, and it's not something that's systemic. But that's something that in the article they actually talk about Disney itself, the company, doing a lot to push that idea in pretty much all of their works. But that's also Jared's point of view. That, well, no, there's not really racism. He's completely colorblind, and it's just there are some people who do bad things.
Some white people that do bad things to black people.
Yeah.
There is that part.
Yeah,
Kind of forgot.
Not all are bad. It's just some. It's okay. And that actually ties right into the policing, where and I hadn't thought of it like this, but policing is not about protecting and serving. It's about control and surveillance. And that goes right into the first encounter that we see in the book with Justice and Officer Castillo, where he watches Justice for some indeterminate amount of time, apparently follows him down the street, and waits for him to actually pick Mello up and put her into the car before he reacts at all. It's like he was just waiting for him to do something, but waited a very long time. So he was mostly wanting to watch him and find something to get him on. And then the violence as pathology was the last part of it. That was so very interesting because the novel seems to align with this notion, which is the idea that violence is never an appropriate response to being treated poorly. So you have the Black Jihad, and the Justice decides, well, they're just way too out there. They're completely wrong for their ideas because they use violence in what they're doing. They're criminals, as he says, which is the same thing you see in Zootopia with the predators. Well, there's something in them.
I haven't seen Zootopia.
Oh, you should totally watch it. It's very good.
Really? Megan's just stunned. You haven't watched it?
But it's an interesting film. It has a lot of depth to it, and it has a lot about race without using humans. So that was always great.
And the workers at the GPS office are all sloths.
That's my favorite part.
It's like one of the best parts about that movie because it's so accurate. It's so accurate, but it's so funny at the same time.
What you said about thinking about what's her face being Jewish, that she's Jewish and she's not, and whether or not she's white. I don't know if you've ever heard of the text that it is how the Irish became white, because initially the Irish were considered of color.
Yeah.
Even though there wouldn't necessarily be any visual markers to it. So unlike the skin color or texture of the hair or something like that. So yeah, it's a phenomenon, and that they gradually became white. Simply by being accepted. I haven't, it's been such a long time since I read it that I can't quite remember how that, let's see what I can see. See what I can see.
And you're talking about an American view of them, right, when you say that they were of color. Well, I know they were hated, but I didn't know that.
But they weren't. In terms of stylized sociological or anthropological understanding, which means the blah blah, were numbers of the groups allowed to go to whites only schools in the South or otherwise partake of an advantage that accrued to whites under Jim Crow. And it's true. I mean, Irish could go wherever they wanted to generally, but they were still discriminated against greatly. And all kinds of stereotypes attached to them, but they didn't get the same kind of treatment. So I see what this author is saying, that yeah, they've always been white. They've never had to face the same kinds of mistreatment that blacks have. So get off it kind of thing. By law, they were considered by law and by custom. Now I got another movie to watch. Zootopia. Jill's not here. For hers is family life and school experience factors in the racial identity development of Black youth in white communities. Fascinating different problems and perspectives between Justice and Manny, as both were adolescent Black males in an upper class, predominantly white school, yet from different socioeconomic backgrounds. Both young men encountered similar instances of racism, but responded differently. The article I chose is helpful in dissecting the different intersectional possibilities of a Black youth's life in regards to living in or schooling in a predominantly white area. Tatum uses examples from real life interviews of several Black college students who grew up in white neighborhoods and attended largely white schools, and relates their experiences as structured by the 5 stages: pre-encounter, encounter, immersion. Kinsley's article is The Invisible Work of Managing Visibility for Social Change. Insights from the leadership of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Benefits and consequences of blending in and standing out. Okay, I don't know who wrote this. What did she see? Because I forgot to put the name on. The White Gaze and Postmodern Triple Consciousness in Walter Dean Meyer's Monster. Is anybody here? Did they do that one? Testing the Limits, Postmodern Adolescent Identities and Contemporary Coming of Age Stories. Gain agency and integrate into the adult world. Subversive. Man, I screwed that whole thing up.
This one is mine, Dr. Stewart.
Okay, so what'd you say?
So after hearing everyone else, I think I might have approached this. And I'm sorry I have 2 things on. My computer is not working, so I have video on my iPad and audio on my computer.
That's okay. You're just doing whatever you can.
I think that I thought about this maybe incorrectly, but I looked at this article because more of a whole of what I felt like Dear Martin represents, resistance, because this book for me, and you guys talked about in the beginning of class with the Amber Geiger. My husband is a 20-year law enforcement vet, and he does criminal investigations, and even he realizes that that case was so just racially.
Oh gosh, it was.
Yeah, and now. I'm sorry.
No, it's the whole case is just impossible.
And you guys were asking about the suspects, and supposedly what I heard today is that people drove from Louisiana to do a drug deal. So I guess the drug deal was across states. I think it's just an explanation of what it was. But anyway, I saw this article as kind of saying that this book is representative of the fact that we're not going to ignore what's happening in the world in young adult literature anymore, and that for Justice, yes, he goes to Yale, but he'll never leave behind. It's not like a perfect world that he fits into. He's always going to be subjected to racial profiling, and he'll always bring with him the things that happen, like with Manny's death. And so I think I might have approached this incorrectly, but that's kind of where I was at.
No, you didn't. You didn't. You did it just fine. There are all kinds of ways to go about this. So, where does your husband? Where is he a police officer?
So we live around San Antonio. Yes, he's a sergeant detective.
Okay.
Yes. And someone mentioned training, and they're absolutely correct. That training doesn't teach you to behave in the way that she did. And
no.
And he could talk about it, more in depth than I could, because I'm not a police officer. But but yeah, it's
I'm just still trying to wrap my head around the whole thing, and the response. There were so many different kinds of responses to it. So what was the drug deal thing?
So they
For the-
said
for
that
the
there were
guys-
3. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm overlapping you. I apologize if I'm interrupting you.
No, go ahead.
I read that they said that there were three men from Louisiana that came to Texas, and that it was a drug deal gone wrong, and so that's why he was murdered in the parking lot. But my first thought to that was there aren't drugs to sell to other people in Louisiana. I mean,
I know. Yeah. Texas is not the place to come to do that. Not in the least. Yeah, there are just so many fishy things going on with all of it. Completely.
Yeah, I agree.
And as I watched the court, as I watched the responses of the judge, of the brother, of his family in general, it's such a mixed bag and nothing but tragedy the whole way around.
Yes.
The whole way around. I don't know. I think I've come to. I bet I'm really sure I left somebody out. Did I leave anybody out on here? No, it doesn't look like it. Covered everybody there. So hey, look, I got everybody present covered on it. And it's 6:34. Wow, this is different. There's something I wanted to bring up though.
I had a question that we've been talking about white privilege as far as this law goes. In my classes that I watch, they talk about unearned privilege.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a contrast? Is there a difference? What's the difference between those two, or is it just where it can apply to everyone, unearned privilege, and then white privilege be different? Because I know we only talk about white privilege, or I guess since.
Well, white privilege is unearned privilege, but I don't know if unearned privilege always addresses.
It's kind of like the square and the rectangle debacle.
Okay.
And maybe depending on the context, unearned privilege could apply to somebody that's white, depending on the context.
Okay.
That looks official.
Yeah. It's an EDU. Science projects, Kenyon.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the discussions we had, because I'm left-handed and everyone who's right-handed here can have one of these that works, but I mean, as far as
Shake those are pain.
Hey, Shay. I haven't seen articles as far as unearned privilege. I've never experienced it as unearned. I've only seen white or male. Or
But another example could be if you're medium, not 7 feet tall and not 4'2". If you're medium, that's kind of an unearned privilege as well. Beds are.
No, it is not. Oh, it does not always do with white privilege.
Okay.
Based on, in many organizational settings, status hierarchies result in the conferral of privileges that are based on achievement, but then you have those that aren't built on achievement that would be unearned. What class is this?
This is their 1301 class. They're doing a memoir that discusses an unearned privilege that they have.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a reflection on that and kind of telling their story,
Mhm.
maybe how to kind of give them that perspective of this is a privilege I have.
Yeah. It can go both ways. Because I know I've unearned privileges just because of being middle class. Nothing to do with race or gender, just being middle class. That I didn't do anything except for show up middle class. Yeah. I can't quite think of them offhand. Something that would be really evident, which means that it's invisible to me. So that's always something to look for if it's invisible to you. Anything else?
I have a good question.
Okay.
Final project. And do you want us to include the articles in the chapters of our collection? In the chapters, I don't know if we should. So, for instance, this chapter is about these articles. We want the articles that's
Just a bibliography, right?
Just the bibliography. I don't need the articles. Yeah, no, that's way too much.
Yeah, that's it.
You don't want. I thought of what it was.
Yay.
I knew if I stalled just a minute more, I'd. I don't know if you know it,
Yeah, I saw that.
but schedule is up for spring 2020. Oh, I don't know when you get to register.
October 21st.
October 21st. It will change. I'm quite sure that this will change because it always gets screwed up. That's why I stopped doing it, because I spent all this time working on it and it wouldn't come out like I put it in. And I said, I am done with that. You are not going to waste my time anymore. So there it is. How many of you are ready to take 595?
I am.
1, 2. Jennifer is 3.
No, you're not.
Katie is. No, you're taking. Katie, aren't you taking 595? No.
Dr. Stewart?
Yeah. Yeah.
I need 599 and 595, and I didn't remember which one of those you told me. Those are my last two, and then I'm done.
Mine too. Same here.
Both of them.
Yeah.
Okay. That's so wrong to have to do those both at the same time, but sometimes it works out that way. So yeah, and that means you have me twice because I'm teaching 599 and 595. All right, so you'll need to send me request permissions so I can get you registered so I can get you permitted into 595.
And is that like
and then
email to you, or is that something I need to do through the website?
Just email me. Okay. Just email me and say, please permit me into 595. And I'll say, okay. And I'll have Jennifer Boyd permit you into 595.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Jordan and I were actually talking about this the other day. I was wondering, would it be possible to get like a jump start on the topic over the fall winter break? Like start gathering articles.
I can send you what we do and you can figure it out.
Well, because I talked a really big game last spring that as soon as I finished summer 1, I was going to read like one article a week and annotate it, so I was going to be ahead of the game. It was going to be awesome, and none of that happened, and now I'm kind of like kicking
well,
myself.
Hopefully you've already done some of the work.
Right. Well, I'd already done 14, so I only needed 16 more, but it's still 16.
Only 16.
Only 16.
Yeah.
But no, but still, like you have to have at least 30. So like you have to have a comprehensive base. And so, and it wasn't lack of being unable to find them. I had plenty. I still have several that I could use. It's just a matter of finding time to read them, understand them, write the annotation. Like I should have held firm to the plan that I had, and I didn't.
I never do.
I
always have
relished
these-
in my freedom.
I'm always so grandiose about these wonderful plans,
Right.
including yesterday's plan that went to hell. So, but okay, so it's Alex, you, anybody else?
Okay.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Jennifer is, and Katie. Okay, so I've got 4 so far. So yeah, send me an email, and once scheduling opens up, or once the registration opens up, because it won't do any good before then, because I won't be able to get anybody in.
And is that
all right? What else? Yes.
Are these classes? I saw Amanda Grant's email. Are these classes the flex dates? Like they're not starting to the 30th, or is this the original start?
595 is starting on its regular time because you have to have that. I said I would quit if they made us if they took it away from us. And even if it is a flex date, I'll know who else is doing it, and I'll just get y'all started beforehand. Easy enough. I can overcome that.
It's 508 coming up.
508.
Because that's the last one in that certificate cycle.
I can.
No,
No.
because I couldn't teach it.
There's only a few classes that are offered to us right now on spring.
I know.
Yeah.
I am really angry.
Is that gonna change? Because
I'm working on it.
Okay. What about the, I really want to take I think it's 520, the critical theory.
Mhm.
Approaches to critical theory.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, it's not offered.
501, 503, 518, 19, 31.
There's 600 level courses too, and you can take 600 level courses. So that adaptations, issues in literacy, Jess is teaching that, reading theory and college English teachers.
Class.
Do what?
Issues in literacy is really good.
So those are face-to-face. So my online students, I'm working really hard. I threw a little bit of a hissy fit. And so let's see what happens to get some more courses online for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I said, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask, you said $5.99 is the one that we should take as soon as possible?
Yes.
And you offer that one in the spring?
Yes. And it's offered dual modality, just like this is.
Okay,
so you
great.
can take the online or the face-to-face.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
In $5.99, do you still read a book in there?
Yeah.
Well, you don't.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of articles.
How was it?
$5.99?
Yeah.
I learned a lot. It was a little stressful, but I learned a lot.
Yeah, I finally got it down as to the best way to teach it, I think.
I feel like it stretched me as
Yes.
like a writer and a researcher and a thinker.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Yeah, I'm sad that class is going to be shortened, but I also can't be too awful sad because the semester doesn't start till the end of January.
And if we're meeting on Wednesdays, it'll actually be the first week of February.
Oh, too bad. I didn't think of that. But so I'll have to cut some stuff. But I won't cut anything meaningful.
I was just gonna say, $5.99, you read a great book when I had that class with you. Straight Man, I think.
Oh,
that
that
was
was so
the class.
funny.
It's such a fun
Yeah,
book. It's hard to
Rousseau.
write so that you laugh out loud.
I know.
And I just wondered if you still.
No, I don't do that anymore.
Was that the only time?
No, I've done others. I've done
Plot Against America.
Plot Against America.
Those are really,
Ubiquitous.
Alternate
We.
history.
But I mean, is that the only time you did Straight Man?
Yeah, that's the only
Still
time I.
was? Oh, I feel lucky that. It was really good.
Yeah, I always change them around. All right. Any questions for anybody? You know what $5.99 to take? The one with my name on it, and not the linguistics one, either online or face-to-face. Okay? I guess that's it. See you, everybody.